The illusion of a widening wage gap reveals a growing disconnect between soaring labor productivity and advancing wages in the United States. While companies in the platform economy produce unprecedented quality products, most workers receive very little benefit. This widening gap reflects an economy where wages concentrate profits, leaving ordinary Americans behind despite their hard work. Watch the video to understand this issue better. Productivity soars. Wages stall, the broken promise. The camera opens on the rhythmic, synchronized motion of an automated assembly line, where silicon and steel move with a precision that far outpaces the human hand. For decades, the foundational promise of the American industrial age was simple. As workers became more productive, their standard of living would rise in lockstep. We begin with the image of a broken compass. Somewhere in the mid-1970 seconds, the needle stopped moving. While the line representing national productivity continued its steep, skyward climb, the line representing the median worker's hourly compensation flattened into a permanent plateau. This is the wage gap mirage, a profound economic schism where the fruits of innovation and labor have been decoupled from the people who provide them. In this documentary, we investigate the architecture of this divergence, a world where the worker produces more value than ever before, yet finds that the prosperity they were promised has vanished like a desert mirage. We explore how trillions of dollars in wealth, generated by the sweat and ingenuity of the labor force, have been redirected toward asset owners and shareholders. As we peel back the layers of the modern ledger, we find a society where the engine of progress is running at full throttle, but the passengers are being left behind in the dust. The productivity trap. Rising output, falling living standards. The signs of this crisis are etched into the very skyline of our cities, in the quiet desperation of our kitchen tables. We see it in the affordability gap, where the growth of real estate prices has outpaced wage growth by a factor of 5 in some regions, turning the basic necessity of shelter into a speculative vehicle for global capital. Economic indicators tell a story of a hollowed-out middle. While the GDP and corporate profit margins hit record highs, the labor share of income sits at its lowest point in the post-war era. In the supermarkets, the presence of shrinkflation serves as a daily reminder that the purchasing power of an hour's labor is being systematically eroded. Credit default swaps CDS on consumer debt are beginning to signal a growing fragility, as the working class uses high-interest credit to bridge the gap between their stagnant paychecks and the rising floor of basic survival. For the individual, the sign is the productivity trap, the reality of working longer hours, mastering complex new technologies, and producing record output, only to find that their bank balance remains unchanged, while their real wages actually decline. This is the mirage in its purest form. The harder you run toward the oasis of financial security, the further the horizon recedes, leaving the laborer exhausted and disillusioned in an economy that prizes the machine over the human. Financialization's extraction loop. Productivity without prosperity. The mechanism of this economic shock is driven by the financialization of the real economy, where productivity gains are immediately captured and redirected. When a corporation implements a new automation system that doubles output, the resulting liquidity does not flow into higher wages. It is redirected towards share buybacks and dividends. This is the primary engine of the wealth gap. As interest rates were suppressed for decades, the cost of capital fell, making it cheaper to replace a worker with a machine or to move production to a lower cost exchange rate environment. The shock occurs when the worker is hit by the double devaluation. Their labor is devalued by automation, while their savings are devalued by the inflation tax. We see the transmission of this shock through real estate monopolies. When institutional investors use their productivity-captured capital to buy up the housing supply, they turn the worker's primary expense into their own primary revenue stream. This mechanical extraction ensures that the velocity of money in the working class remains stagnant, while capital circulates at high speeds within the financial elite. The mechanism is a closed loop of extraction that ensures that no matter how much value the worker adds to the system, the architecture is designed to harvest that value before it can ever be converted into personal prosperity. Global warnings. When productivity breaks the social contract. Global case studies offer a grim roadmap of what happens when productivity and prosperity are allowed to diverge indefinitely. In the 1997 IMF crisis, we saw how the tiger economies of Asia, which had achieved massive productivity gains, were decimated as their labor forces bore the full weight of structural adjustment, while international creditors were made whole. In Argentina, the decoupling led to a society where the professional class was wiped out by currency collapse, leaving a nation of highly skilled workers living in poverty. Greece provides a haunting example of internal devaluation, where productivity was demanded at even higher levels, while wages were slashed to satisfy external debt obligations. In Turkey and Venezuela, we see the extreme end of the mirage, where the state attempts to mask the loss of prosperity through monetary expansion, leading to hyperinflation that effectively turns the workers' daily labor into a race against the clock. These cases demonstrate that when the social contract between work and reward is broken, the result is always a loss of social cohesion and a rise in political volatility. These nations serve as the canary in the coal mine for the United States, illustrating that a nation cannot survive as a productive powerhouse if its people are merely the fuel for a machine that offers them no share in the final product. Death of social mobility. Rise of the rentier economy. Within the United States, the impact of the wage gap mirage is felt as the death of social mobility. The US has transitioned from a productive democracy to a rentier economy, where wealth is increasingly derived from the ownership of scarce assets rather than the creation of new value. We see this in the real estate market, which has become a barrier to entry for the very workers who build and maintain our cities. The interest rate pivots of the Federal Reserve act as a crude instrument that often punishes the laborer through higher credit costs to cool an economy that was already failing to provide them with a surplus. The impact on the individual is a sense of economic claustrophobia. For the first time in American history, the youngest generations are projected to be poorer than their parents, despite being the most productive and highly educated cohort in history. This is the productivity pay gap made manifest. It creates a society where liquidity is hoarded at the top, leading to stagnant domestic demand and a reliance on asset bubbles to sustain growth. The US economy is becoming a hollow shell, where the statistics of success mask a reality of debt, exhaustion, and a working class that is being squeezed to the point of structural failure, threatening the long-term stability of the American experiment. Policy for the elite, protecting the wage gap mirage. Government and central bank responses have largely served to protect the mirage rather than dissolve it. Since the 1,970 seconds, policy choices have consistently prioritized capital over labor. Central banks have used monetary policy to suppress inflation, often by suppressing wage growth, while simultaneously fueling asset bubbles through quantitative easing. This has protected the purchasing power of the wealthy while eroding the earning power of the worker. We see the government's role in the tax code, where capital gains are taxed at a lower rate than ordinary income, effectively subsidizing those who own the machines over those who operate. When systemic shocks occur, the bailouts are directed toward the too-big-to-fail financial institutions, while the austerity is directed toward the public infrastructure and education systems that the working class relies on. This institutional bias ensures that the prosperity generated by productivity gains remains concentrated. The regulatory environment has also shifted, allowing for monopoly power in key sectors like tech and housing, which further extracts rent from the working class. The response from the state has not been to fix the broken compass, but to redefine success, to include a soaring stock market, even as the middle class continues to shrink, cementing the mirage as a permanent feature of the national landscape. Strategic autonomy, surviving the wage gap mirage independently. Personal survival in the era of the wage gap mirage requires a rejection of the standard path. If the traditional link between hard work and financial security is broken, then the individual must seek strategic autonomy. This means moving away from being a pure laborer and becoming a micro-asset owner. For the individual, the primary strategy is to definancialize your life as much as possible. This involves reducing reliance on high-interest consumer debt, which is the primary tool used to capture your future labor. Financial literacy must be replaced by productivity literacy, understanding how to leverage technology to create your own passive income or digital assets that you own outright. The useful insight for the viewer is to capture your own surplus. In a world where the corporation will not share the gains of automation, you must find ways to automate your own life and your own small-scale production. This includes strategic saving in hard assets like gold, silver, or land that cannot be easily devalued by monetary policy. It also involves building local resilience networks to lower your cost of survival. True security in the mirage is found not in your salary, but in your asset base and your skills. By reducing your rent footprint and increasing your ownership stake, you can begin to bridge the gap between your productivity and your personal prosperity on your own terms. Reclaiming prosperity by reuniting productivity and pay. The remarkable closing message of this documentary is that the wage gap mirage is a human-made illusion that can be unmade. We have seen how the architecture of our economy was redesigned to favor extraction over contribution. But the history of the labor movement and the Great Compression shows that a different path is possible. The broken compass can be repaired. The lesson for the viewer is that prosperity is not something that is granted by a benevolent market. It is something that is negotiated through collective power and policy. We stand at a crossroads. We can continue toward a neo-feudal society of owners and renters, or we can rebuild a productive democracy where every gain in efficiency is a gain for the person who made it possible. The mirage only persists as long as we accept the narrative that our labor is a commodity to be minimized. Once we realize that our productivity is the only true source of wealth, we possess the power to demand its fair return. The sun sets on the era of the mirage. Let it rise on a new era where the dignity of work is once again the solid ground upon which our nation is built. The future is not a machine that replaces us, but a tool that empowers us if we have the courage to reclaim the prosperity that our labor has already created. The wage gap's crisis of time and purpose. As we look closer at the societal impact, we see that the wage gap mirage has created a crisis of purpose. When productivity no longer leads to prosperity, the social contract that binds a nation together begins to dissolve. We see it in the erosion of trust in institutions and the rise of nihilism in the workforce. The impact on a person's life is the loss of time. In the 1,960 seconds, it was predicted that by now we would have a 15-hour work week due to productivity gains. Instead, we work longer than ever just to stay in place. This is the time rent we pay to a system that refuses to share its efficiency. The insight for the viewer is that your most valuable asset is not your money, but your attention and your time. The mirage is designed to keep you on a treadmill of consumption to pay for the debt that the gap has forced upon you. To break the cycle, you must reclaim your time by simplifying your life and focusing on meaningful contribution rather than measured output. The hollow middle is not just an economic category. It is a spiritual void left by a society that values the product more than the producer. By valuing ourselves and our communities, we begin to fill that void and build a life that is rich in the ways that truly matter. Reclaiming prosperity, building a human-centered economy. We conclude the Wage Gap Mirage with a vision of a recalibrated economy. The story of productivity versus prosperity is the defining struggle of the 21st century. We have seen how the wealth gap doctrine and the interest trap are all parts of a system that has lost its human center. But the architecture of resilience is already being built by those who refuse to be defined by the mirage. The remarkable message is that the prosperity we seek is not a distant oasis, but a seed we carry within us. By demanding equity, transparency, and ownership, we can turn the mirage back into a reality. The signs of crisis were the wake-up call for a nation that had been dreaming of infinite growth without cost. Your role in this transformation is to be the truth teller in your own life and your own economy. The American dream is not a house you rent from a corporation. It is the freedom to enjoy the fruits of your own labor. The mirage is fading, and the solid ground of a fair society is waiting to be reclaimed. The journey ends not with a margin call, but with a call to connection, to each other, to our work, and to the future we deserve. The compass is in your hands. Now, set the course for home.